Afghanistan 2022. The sun baked the earth into a brittle crust of dust and stone. In the shadow of a jagged ridge, 6 Navy SEALs pressed their bodies against what little cover the terrain offered. Captain Maverick Braxton's face was streaked with sweat and grime, his muscular frame tense as he spoke urgently into his radio. Overwatch, this is Echo 6. We are pinned down in the valley. Request immediate air support. His voice carried the controlled urgency of a man who had faced death before, but never quite gotten comfortable with its proximity. Static crackled back at him. Then silence. Braxton tried again, adjusting frequencies with fingers that refused to tremble despite the circumstances. Nothing. Comms are jammed, he told his team, their expressions grim beneath layers of tactical gear and desert dust. They've cut us off. Across the valley, at least 20 Taliban fighters had positioned themselves on the high ground. The terrain that was supposed to provide the SEAL team cover had become a killing zone. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. Sergeant Eric Miller, the team's sniper, peered through his scope. I count 23 tangos. Heavy weapons on the ridge to the north. We move, we die. The words hung in the hot, still air. 6 of America's most elite warriors trapped like animals. Their extraction point lay 2 kilometers away across open ground that might as well have been the surface of the moon. Then it happened. A single shot cracked across the valley. Clean, precise. A Taliban commander's head snapped backward, his body collapsing like a marionette with cut strings. Before his lieutenants could react, a second shot dropped another fighter. Sniper, Braxton whispered, scanning the distant ridgeline. But not one of ours. 3 more shots in rapid succession. 3 more bodies fell. The Taliban fighters scattered, shouting in Pashto, firing wildly at shadows. The radio in Braxton's hands suddenly came to life. A woman's voice, cool and measured, spoke through the static. Echo 6, this is Phantom. You have a window to your east in 30 seconds. I'll provide cover. Move on my mark. Braxton hesitated. The voice wasn't from any support team he knew about. There were no female snipers assigned to their operation, but the bodies on the ridge were real enough. Who is this? Identify yourself. That's not important. What matters is I'm about to save your lives. Get ready to move. 3, 2, 1, mark. Braxton gave the signal. His men rose as one and sprinted across the open ground. Behind them, precise shots continued to ring out, each one finding its mark with uncanny accuracy. As they reached the extraction point, the helicopter already descending, Braxton paused and looked back toward the distant ridge where their unknown savior must be positioned. Phantom, this is Echo 6. We're clear. Who are you? The radio crackled. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then her voice came through one last time. Just a ghost who remembers what service means. The line went dead. By the time intelligence officers debriefed Braxton's team, there was no trace of the mysterious sniper who had dropped 11 enemy combatants with 11 perfect shots at distances exceeding a mile. Fort Blackwood, Virginia. 8 months later, the NATO elite training compound stood like a fortress against the morning sky, American flags snapping in the breeze alongside the banners of allied nations. Here, the world's most lethal warriors came to share techniques, tactics, and the brutal wisdom earned on battlefields across the globe. 200 specialists from 12 countries, Navy SEALs, British SAS, German KSK, French GIGN, men who had passed selection courses that broke soldiers like twigs. The elite of the elite, handpicked for cross-training in advanced combat operations. Elena Thorne stepped off the transport bus, her blonde hair tied in a practical high bun, blue eyes taking in the compound with the careful assessment of someone memorizing exits. She wore a simple gray t-shirt and khaki pants, a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. At 24, she looked younger than her age, her porcelain skin dotted with freckles across her nose. The contrast between her and the hard-faced operators in the courtyard couldn't have been more stark. Captain Maverick Braxton stood with his crew near the administration building, his broad shoulders straining against digital camouflage that looked tailored to his 6'2" frame. At 28, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd never encountered a challenge he couldn't dominate through sheer force of will. His laughter cut across the compound as he spotted Elena. Hey, medic, where's the field hospital you got lost from? The mockery in his voice drew eyes from across the yard. His crew, Sergeant Tyler Blackwood, Corporal Rex Hawthorne, and Private First Class Duke Morrison, flanked him like a pack of wolves. Elena approached the registration desk with measured steps, her voice carrying the gentle cadence of someone who'd learned early that speaking softly often made people listen harder. I registered for logistics training. Braxton's laughter exploded again. Logistics, little girl, this is NATO elite training, not summer camp for wannabes. He turned to his crew, his voice pitched to Carrie. Who let this kid through? Security standards really are dropping. Phones emerged from pockets. Live streams began to roll. The humiliation of the small blonde woman became instant entertainment for men who measured worth in kill counts in combat deployments. What none of them noticed was how Elena's eyes cataloged every face, every exit, every security camera. How she assessed distances and sight lines with the automatic precision of someone mapping a tactical environment. How she held herself with the controlled stillness of a predator pretending to be prey. Lieutenant Leslie Aldridge emerged from the administrative building, auburn hair pulled back in regulation-style uniform, crisp despite the early hour. At 26, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned every promotion the hard way. When her eyes found Elena, something flickered across her features. Recognition, perhaps, or concern. Maybe ease up a little, Braxton, Aldridge called out. First day nerves hit everyone different. Braxton turned, his grin widening. Oh, look, Lieutenant Mom is here to protect her little duckling. Don't worry, Paisley. We're just having some fun, right? Logistics. Elena's response was barely audible. Yes, sir. But something in those two words made Aldridge's blood run cold. She'd heard that particular tone before. The careful neutrality of someone who could end a conversation permanently, but chose not to. Master Sergeant Joaquin Rodriguez had trained thousands of soldiers over his 20-year career. At 50, his weathered face had become a map of harsh terrain and harsher decisions. His dark eyes missed nothing as he supervised the weapons inspection under the unforgiving Virginia sun. Elena approached the weapons station with appropriate hesitation, reaching for the M4 carbine, like someone who'd seen one in training videos, but never held the real thing. Her grip looked uncertain, her stance awkward. Rodriguez stepped closer, ready to provide basic instruction to someone clearly out of their depth. But the moment her hands made contact with the weapon, something shifted. The uncertainty vanished, replaced by movements so fluid they looked choreographed. Her fingers automatically checked the chamber. Her grip adjusted to the optimal firing position. She performed a brass check with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done it thousands of times. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds, but Rodriguez had been around firearms long enough to recognize the difference between training and instinct. This wasn't someone who'd been taught proper weapon handling. This was someone for whom proper weapon handling had become as natural as breathing. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked quietly. Elena's response was carefully casual. "Basic training, Sergeant, just like everyone else." Rodriguez studied her face. In 20 years, he'd never seen anyone transition from apparent incompetence to expert handling that seamlessly. He made a mental note to check her training records more carefully. From across the armory, Colonel Richard Montgomery observed the interaction with growing interest. At 52, his silver-streaked hair and hawkish features projected the kind of measured authority that came from 3 decades of military service. As camp administrator, he had access to every trainee's background file. Elena Thorne's file was interesting. Most relevant details were classified above his clearance level, which was unusual for someone supposedly assigned to logistics support. Her previous duty stations were redacted. Her training history showed gaps that didn't align with her stated experience. Montgomery prided himself on running the tightest program in NATO. Every trainee was here for a reason. Their backgrounds thoroughly vetted their capabilities, matched to program requirements. Elena Thorne represented a puzzle he didn't like, and puzzles in his program had a way of becoming problems. The morning physical fitness assessment took place on the compound's main training field. 200 elite soldiers arranged themselves in formation, their uniforms displaying the insignia of their respective special operations units like battle flags. Elena found herself in the rear rank, positioned among support personnel who'd somehow earned inclusion in the elite program. The arrangement was intentional, a visual reminder of the hierarchy that separated warriors from support staff. Master Sergeant Rodriguez took the elevated platform at the front of the formation. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to NATO Elite Cross Training. For the next 6 weeks, you will be challenged, tested, and pushed beyond whatever limits you think you have. His eyes swept across the assembled trainees, pausing momentarily on Elena. The first assessment is basic physical fitness. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a 3-mile run. These are the minimum standards for participation. Anyone who fails any portion will be immediately recycled to basic instruction. The implications were clear. This wasn't just assessment, it was elimination. Push-ups came first, each trainee required to complete a minimum of 80 repetitions in perfect form. Elena positioned herself on the grass, assuming the front-leaning rest position with mechanical precision. What observers couldn't see was how her muscle memory automatically adjusted her hand placement to the optimal position for maximum efficiency. Her form was textbook perfect, but more than that, it was the form of someone who'd done thousands of push-ups in conditions where failure meant consequences far worse than recycling to basic training. She completed 120 repetitions without visible strain, her breathing controlled throughout the exercise. Rodriguez noticed. In 20 years of training, soldiers he'd developed an eye for the difference between someone who was naturally strong and someone who'd been conditioned through sustained combat operations. Elena's performance suggested the latter. The sit-ups followed the same pattern. She completed 140 repetitions with the same mechanical precision, her core strength clearly developed through training that went far beyond standard military requirements. Pull-ups were where most support personnel struggled. The upper body strength requirements typically favored combat specialists who spent their careers carrying heavy weapons and equipment. Elena approached the bar with apparent uncertainty, reaching up like someone who'd never attempted the exercise before. But the moment her hands closed around the metal, her body moved with practiced efficiency. She completed 35 perfect repetitions, each one executed with a controlled power that spoke of extensive training in environments where upper body strength was a survival requirement. By now, several instructors were paying attention. Rodriguez made notes on his clipboard while exchanging glances with other senior NCOs who'd noticed the discrepancy between Elena's supposed background and her actual performance. The 3-mile run was conducted on the compound's perimeter road, a challenging course that included several hills and uneven terrain designed to test endurance under realistic conditions. Elena started conservatively positioning herself in the middle of the pack, while the competitive type surged ahead in an early display of dominance. But as the run progressed, something became apparent to those watching closely. While other runners showed the normal signs of exertion, heavy breathing, visible sweat, gradually deteriorating form, Elena maintained the same steady pace and controlled breathing from start to finish. She completed the course in 18 minutes and 42 seconds, fast enough to rank in the top 15%, but not so fast as to draw unwanted attention. More importantly, she showed no signs of fatigue at the finish line. While other elite soldiers bent over their knees to catch their breath, Elena stood calmly, her breathing barely elevated. Lieutenant Aldridge, who'd finished in 16th place despite her intensive training regimen, found herself studying Elena with growing suspicion. "Nice run," Aldridge commented as they walked toward the equipment area. "Thank you, ma'am. You too. You don't seem winded." "I try to stay in shape." It was another perfectly reasonable response that revealed nothing while somehow suggesting everything. Aldridge had spent enough time around special operations personnel to recognize the careful way they discussed their capabilities, always understated, never revealing the full extent of their training or experience. The afternoon brought barracks assignments. Elena found herself in Building C, third floor, room 14. The moment she entered the space, her behavior shifted again. While other trainees focused on claiming the best bunks or complaining about the Spartan accommodations, Elena conducted what could only be described as a security assessment. She checked the window locks, tested the structural integrity of the door frame, and positioned her gear in a way that provided clear sight lines to both the entrance and the emergency exit. Her roommate was Jessica Warner, a communications specialist from the Australian Defence Force. Warner bounced into the room with casual familiarity, chattering about the training schedule, while Elena methodically arranged her minimal belongings. "So what's your specialty?" Warner asked, settling onto her chosen bunk. "I heard your logistics, but that's pretty broad." "Supply chain transportation general logistics support," Elena replied, her tone suggesting the conversation was closed. But Warner was the kind of person who viewed closed conversations as personal challenges. "Come on, there's got to be more to it than that." Nobody gets into NATO elite training for general anything. Elena's pause lasted just long enough to be noticeable. Fort Bragg, administrative support mostly. The lie came smoothly, but Warner had grown up in a military family and knew the difference between someone who'd spent time pushing paperwork and someone who'd spent time in the field. Elena's hands were too calloused, her awareness too sharp, her gear arrangement too tactical for someone whose primary experience was administrative. As night fell over the compound, Elena lay in her bunk, listening to Warner's steady breathing. Her mind processed the day's information, identifying key personalities, assessing social dynamics, noting security protocols, and facility layout. Tomorrow would bring the first real test. The live fire exercise would require her to demonstrate sufficient competency to avoid suspicion while carefully concealing the true extent of her capabilities. It was a delicate balance that would require all her training in deception and misdirection. She thought about the photograph hidden in her gear bag, a picture that would answer many questions if anyone found it, but also raise questions that could destroy everything she'd worked to accomplish. The image showed a younger version of herself standing next to a man whose face had been deliberately obscured. Both wore gear that didn't appear in any official inventory. The man's identity was classified beyond most security clearances, but his influence extended throughout the special operations community. He taught her things that weren't written in any manual, showed her techniques that existed only in the memories of a select few. He'd also given her the mission that brought her to this place at this time for reasons that remained hidden even from most of those who'd approved her assignment. As sleep claimed her, Elena's last conscious thought was of the skull tattoo hidden beneath her clothing. The mark of an organization that officially didn't exist, earned through trials that officially never happened, representing capabilities that officially belonged to someone else entirely. Morning came at 0500 hours with the kind of wake-up call that separated elite soldiers from everyone else. The compound's PA system crackled to life with Master Sergeant Rodriguez's voice. Rise and shine, elite warriors. You have exactly 30 minutes to be dress-fed and formed up in the main courtyard. Anyone who's late gets to explain their time management skills to me personally. The barracks exploded into controlled chaos. Elena was dressed and ready within 5 minutes, her gear arranged with systematic efficiency that came from years of practice in environments where being unprepared meant death. Warner, still struggling with the transition from sleep to alertness, watched with amazement. Holy cow, you're like a robot. How are you already ready? Early riser, Elena replied, helping Warner with her equipment. Military routine becomes habit after a while. Yeah, but you move like someone who's been doing this for years. How long have you been in? The question hung in the air for a moment too long. Elena's official service record showed 3 years of administrative positions, but her movements suggested someone with far more extensive experience. Long enough, she said finally, shouldering her pack. The mess hall was organized chaos with 200 hungry soldiers moving through the breakfast line. Elena selected her meal with careful attention to nutritional requirements rather than taste preferences. Protein for sustained energy, complex carbohydrates for endurance, minimal processed sugars. It was the kind of meal selection that suggested someone who understood food as fuel rather than pleasure. Another small detail separating her from soldiers whose primary concern was satisfying hunger. Braxton spotted her from across the mess hall. Morning, sunshine, he called as he approached her table, his crew trailing behind. Ready for your big day. Hope you're not too attached to that perfect safety record. Elena looked up from her meal, her expression neutral. Good morning, Captain. I'm looking forward to the training. The polite response, delivered without any trace of sarcasm or challenge, somehow made Braxton's harassment feel clumsy and obvious. He'd been expecting fear or defiance, emotions he could exploit. Instead, he got professional courtesy that made him look like a bully. Blackwood, sensing his captain's frustration, decided to escalate. Your best might not be good enough logistics. This isn't filing paperwork or ordering supplies. This is real soldier work. I understand the distinction, Sergeant. The calm acceptance of their mockery was beginning to unnerve Morrison, who'd expected tears or anger, something he could understand and exploit. Instead, they were dealing with someone who absorbed their harassment like armor absorbing bullets. The weapons familiarization exercise took place in the compound's main armory, where Master Sergeant Rodriguez had arranged a comprehensive display of NATO standard equipment. Each trainee would demonstrate basic competency with rifles, pistols, and support weapons before being cleared for live fire exercises. Elena approached the weapons display with appropriate hesitation, reaching for an M4 carbine with apparent uncertainty. Rodriguez stepped closer. First time with an M4 specialist. Yes, Sergeant. I mean, I've seen them, but never actually handled one. No problem. Let's start with basic safety. Always treat every weapon as if it's loaded. Never point the muzzle at anything you don't intend to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Elena nodded attentively, playing the role of eager student receiving crucial instruction. But as Rodriguez guided her through the basic functions, charging handle magazine release safety selector, something began to shift in her handling. The uncertainty gradually gave way to competence, and competence gave way to what could only be described as familiarity. Her grip adjusted to the optimal position without conscious thought. Her stance shifted into perfect shooting form. She performed a function check with smooth efficiency that suggested extensive experience. The transformation was subtle enough that casual observation might miss it entirely. But Rodriguez had been training soldiers long enough to recognize the difference between someone learning new skills and someone remembering old ones. "Where did you say you did your basic training?" Rodriguez asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Fort Jackson, Sergeant." "And what was your MOS training?" "76 Yankee Supply Specialist." The answers were textbook correct, matching exactly what appeared in her personnel file. But Rodriguez had trained enough supply specialists to know that their weapons familiarity typically extended to basic rifle marksmanship and not much more. What he was seeing suggested someone whose weapons training had been considerably more comprehensive. He handed her a Beretta M9 pistol, watching as she accepted it with the same initial uncertainty she'd shown with the rifle. But again, as she handled the weapon, muscle memory began to override conscious performance. Her grip found the optimal position automatically. Her finger placement on the slide and trigger guard spoke of extensive training, and she field stripped the weapon with movements that were too practiced to be recently learned. "Interesting technique," Rodriguez commented as Elena reassembled the pistol with professional efficiency. "Where'd you pick that up?" "Just following the manual, Sergeant." Rodriguez had watched thousands of soldiers follow manuals, and manual trained competency looked nothing like what he was observing. This was the kind of familiarity that came from extensive use under stress, the kind of muscle memory that developed only through sustained training in environments where weapon maintenance was a survival requirement. By the time the weapons familiarization was complete, Rodriguez had filled 3 pages of notes with observations that painted a picture increasingly inconsistent with Elena's official background. The live fire exercise was scheduled for 1,400 hours. Elena spent the interval methodically cleaning her assigned M4, her movements efficient despite her supposed unfamiliarity with the system. Warner, struggling with her own weapon maintenance, watched with growing confusion. "You're really good at that for someone who's new to this." "I'm a quick learner." "Yeah, but that's not just quick learning. That's like muscle memory, like you've done this before." Elena paused in her cleaning routine, her hands going still for just a moment. "I guess some things come naturally." It was another non-answer that somehow felt like a confession. The live fire range was a sophisticated facility designed to test marksmanship under realistic conditions: electronic targets at various distances, computer-controlled scoring systems, and environmental factors designed to simulate combat stress. Elena approached her assigned firing position with the same apparent uncertainty she'd shown throughout the weapons familiarization. Her stance looked awkward, her grip uncertain. The exercise began with basic marksmanship at 50 meters. Each trainee required to place 5 rounds within the target's scoring rings. Most of the elite soldiers performed well, their shots grouping tightly in the high-scoring zones with the consistency expected from special operations personnel. Elena's first shot went wide, missing the target entirely and striking the earth berm backstop with a dull thud. Laughter rippled through the nearby firing positions as Braxton's voice carried across the range. "Looks like logistics needs some basic lessons. Maybe try holding it by the right end." Her second shot was closer, but still outside the scoring rings, drawing more mockery from the elite trainees who were clustering their rounds in the target's center mass. But Rodriguez, observing from the range tower, noticed something others missed. Elena's wild shots weren't actually wild. They were consistently striking specific points on the target framework, suggesting someone who was hitting exactly where she was aiming, just not where others expected her to aim. Her third shot struck the target's outer ring, a marginal improvement that suggested gradual learning. Her fourth shot moved closer to center, and her fifth shot struck the scoring zone with respectable accuracy. It was exactly the kind of progression someone might expect from a support specialist receiving her first serious marksmanship training. Slow initial learning followed by rapid improvement as basic concepts clicked into place. But Rodriguez had been observing closely enough to notice the subtle adjustments Elena made between shots. Not the fumbling corrections of someone learning new skills, but the methodical fine-tuning of someone calibrating equipment to environmental conditions. The exercise progressed to longer ranges, 100 meters, then 200, with increasingly challenging conditions. Most support personnel struggled at these distances, their shots scattering, as wind and range estimation challenges exceeded their training. Elena continued her pattern of apparent gradual improvement, her shots slowly tightening into respectable groups, while never quite achieving the precision demonstrated by the elite combat specialists. It was a performance that suggested competence without excellence, progress without mastery. But Lieutenant Aldridge, shooting from the adjacent firing point, was beginning to notice inconsistencies in Elena's technique. The way she read wind conditions was too sophisticated for someone learning basic marksmanship. Her breathing pattern during shooting was too controlled, too indicative of extensive training in precision shooting techniques. Most tellingly, her adjustment methods between shots suggested someone who understood advanced ballistics, not just the basic concepts taught in standard marksmanship training, but the subtle calculations that separated amateur shooters from professional marksmen. As the final phase began, the range officer called out new instructions. Prepare for moving target engagement. Multiple targets will appear at varying distances for 3 seconds each. Identify, acquire, and engage as quickly as possible. This was the kind of test that separated recreational shooters from combat marksmen, the ability to rapidly assess threats and respond with precision under time pressure. Elena looked nervous as she reloaded her rifle with fresh magazines. Her hands appeared to tremble slightly, her breathing quickening with apparent anxiety. The buzzer sounded. Buzzer. Targets sprang up across the range, some close, others at extreme distances, all demanding split-second decisions. Most trainees performed admirably, their special operations backgrounds evident in their speed and precision. But a few, particularly those from support roles, struggled with the complexity of the exercise. Then something unexpected happened. A bird, a common starling, burst from the brush to Elena's right, startling several shooters. Without conscious thought, Elena's rifle swung toward the sudden movement. In less than half a second, her entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the uncertain logistics specialist. In her place stood someone else entirely, a predator whose reflexes operated at speeds most humans couldn't comprehend. Her body shifted automatically into a perfect shooting stance. Her breathing controlled, her eyes tracking the bird's flight path with laser-like focus. She caught herself before pulling the trigger, but not before Rodriguez, watching through binoculars, witnessed the transformation. It lasted less than 2 seconds before she forced herself back into the role of the struggling novice, but the damage was done. Rodriguez had seen what few others had, a momentary glimpse behind a carefully constructed facade, the kind of combat reflex that couldn't be faked or trained. It could only be forged through experiences that left their mark on body and soul alike. He made his decision. Tonight he would report his observations to Colonel Montgomery. Elena Thorne was not who she claimed to be, and in a facility dedicated to training elite killers, an unknown quantity represented a potential threat that couldn't be ignored. As the exercise concluded and trainees secured their weapons, Elena felt the weight of Rodriguez's gaze. She'd made a mistake, allowed instinct to override control for just an instant. In her world, such mistakes often prove fatal. She wondered how much time she had left before her cover was compromised, and whether she would complete her mission before that happened. Because in 3 weeks, according to intelligence reports, someone at this facility would transmit classified NATO operational plans to an enemy force. Those plans would lead to the deaths of 27 special operations personnel from 3 different countries. And Elena Thorne, if that was even her real name, was here to ensure that transmission never took place, no matter what it cost her, or anyone else. Colonel Richard Montgomery's office occupied the top floor of the administration building, affording him a panoramic view of the training facility. As darkness settled over the compound, he stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the last trainees return to their barracks. Master Sergeant Rodriguez sat in a chair before the colonel's desk, his weathered face impassive as he delivered his report. "She's not what her file says she is, sir." Montgomery turned from the window. "Elaborate. Weapons handling suggests extensive training beyond basic military requirements. Physical conditioning consistent with sustained combat operations. Tactical awareness indicates someone who spent time in environments where situational awareness was a survival requirement." The colonel nodded, his expression confirming that Rodriguez's observations aligned with his own assessment. "Background verification yielded limited success," Montgomery said. "Most of her training history is classified above my clearance level, which is unusual for support personnel. Medical records indicate treatment for injuries consistent with combat exposure, but the specifics are redacted." Rodriguez leaned forward. "During today's live fire exercise, she exhibited an instinctive response to unexpected movement. The kind of combat reflex you can't train into someone. It has to be earned." Montgomery returned to his desk and opened a secure laptop. "I've been making calls to contacts who might provide additional insight. The responses have been interesting." "How so, sir?" "Everyone I've spoken to has been extremely careful about what they say. Not what they tell me, but how they phrase it." Montgomery's fingers tapped a rhythmic pattern on his desk. "It suggests involvement of agencies that prefer not to leave fingerprints." Both men understood the implications. In their combined 50 years of military experience, they'd encountered enough classified operations to recognize the signs of something that existed beyond conventional chains of command. "Recommendations?" Montgomery asked. "Close observation during tomorrow's exercises. If she's what I think she is, the tactical movement evolutions will be more revealing than basic marksmanship." The colonel nodded. "And if she's not what we think she is," Rodriguez's expression hardened, "then we've got someone infiltrating a facility that trains the world's most lethal operators. Either way, sir, she bears watching." After Rodriguez left, Montgomery made another encrypted call, this one to a Pentagon contact who specialized in tracking classified personnel movements. "Richard, it's been a while," the voice on the other end said. "What can I do for you?" "I need information on a trainee, Elena Thorne." A long pause. "Where did you hear that name?" "She's currently at my facility, registered for logistics training." Another pause, longer this time. "Richard, this conversation isn't happening. But if it were, I'd tell you to let this one play out. Some stones shouldn't be turned over unless you're prepared for what might crawl out." The line went dead, leaving Montgomery staring at the phone. In 30 years of military service, he'd learned to trust his instincts about people. His instincts were telling him that tomorrow's training exercises were going to be very interesting indeed. Elena moved through the darkened compound with the fluid grace of a predator. It was 0200 hours the dead time when security was at its most relaxed, when even elite soldiers surrendered to the biological need for rest. She had memorized the patrol patterns of the night guards, identified the blind spots in the security camera coverage, and calculated the precise intervals between motion sensor sweeps. Now she slipped between these layers of protection like a ghost passing through walls. The administration building required a key card for access after hours. Elena produced a small device from her pocket, pressed it against the card reader, and waited 3 seconds. The lock clicked open. Inside, she moved directly to Montgomery's office, her steps silent on the polished floor. The door was secured with a biometric lock fingerprint and retinal scanner. She made no attempt to bypass it. Instead, she knelt beside the door, produced another device from her pocket, and pressed it against the wall. The thermal imager showed heat signatures inside the office electronic equipment, but no human presence. More importantly, it revealed the specific pattern of the security system's infrared sensors. Elena took photographs with a specialized camera, then melted back into the shadows. She had what she came for: confirmation that Montgomery's office used a security system with a very specific configuration. One that matched equipment she'd encountered in places where military secrets changed hands for substantial sums of money. As she made her way back to the barracks, Elena's mind processed this new information. The security system in Montgomery's office wasn't standard military issue. It was Russian, specifically a Kaspersky KS-7 intrusion prevention system, cutting edge and extremely expensive. The kind of equipment that wouldn't appear on any official procurement record. Either Montgomery had unusual connections in Moscow, or someone had installed it without his knowledge. Either way, it represented another piece in the puzzle she was assembling. Dawn broke over the compound, bringing with it the organized chaos of 200 elite soldiers preparing for another day of intensive training. Elena completed her morning routine with mechanical efficiency, her movements precise and economical. Warner watched her roommate with growing curiosity. You know, I've never seen anyone so perfectly organized. It's like you've got everything calculated down to the second. Elena smiled the carefully practiced smile she'd developed for her cover identity. My dad was really strict about being prepared. Old habits die hard. Warner nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with the explanation. My brothers are all military. None of them move like you do, and two of them are special forces. Elena redirected the conversation. What's your background? How did you end up in communications? The diversion worked. Warner launched into a detailed explanation of her career path, giving Elena the opportunity to listen without revealing anything more about herself. By the time they reached the mess hall, Warner had forgotten her earlier observations caught up in describing the technical challenges of maintaining secure communications in hostile environments. Across the mess hall, Braxton and his team were holding court at their usual table. But today their attention wasn't focused on Elena. Instead, they were gathered around a tablet, watching something that elicited low whistles and murmured comments. Lieutenant Aldridge entered the mess hall, her uniform crisp despite the early hour. She made her way directly to Braxton's table, her expression neutral, but her posture radiating authority. What's so interesting, Captain? Braxton looked up, a slow grin spreading across his face. After-action report from the Afghanistan extraction last year. Someone finally declassified the drone footage. He turned the tablet toward her. Check it out, 11 tangos dropped by an unidentified sniper. Command still doesn't know who pulled those triggers. Aldridge studied the footage, her brow furrowed. That's impressive shooting. Extreme range, multiple targets, perfect shot placement. Whoever it was saved our asses, Braxton admitted. We were pinned down with no air support, comms jammed. Then boom, he snapped his fingers. Guardian Angel starts dropping tangos like it's a carnival game. Elena approached the food line, positioning herself within earshot while appearing focused on breakfast selections. Her face revealed nothing, but her heart rate accelerated slightly as she recognized the footage. The weird thing, Braxton continued, is that when we finally made contact with this mystery shooter, it was a woman's voice. Cool as ice, calling shots like she was reading a shopping list. Morrison laughed. Come on, man. No way a woman made those shots. Probably some Delta operator with voice modulation for OPSEC. Aldridge's eyes narrowed. You think women can't shoot, Morrison? Not saying that, ma'am. Morrison backpedaled. Just, those shots were past a mile. In mountain terrain. With wind variables, that's world-class shooting. And women can't be world-class. Aldridge's voice remained level, but there was an edge to it. It's not about gender, Braxton interjected. It's about training. Nobody gets that good without specialized instruction. Years of it, and there just aren't many female snipers with that kind of experience in our inventory. From her position in the food line, Elena selected her breakfast with careful deliberation, her expression neutral despite the conversation that touched so close to her reality. Today's exercises should be interesting, Rodriguez announced as he entered the mess hall. Tactical movement and small unit operations. We'll see who's been paying attention and who's been coasting on reputation. His eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly as they found Elena. There was something in his gaze, not suspicion exactly, but focused attention. The kind of look a predator gives to something that doesn't quite belong in its environment. The tactical movement exercises were designed to test how elite soldiers navigated hostile terrain under combat conditions. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had constructed a complex obstacle course that simulated urban combat environments. Concrete barriers, razor wire simulated building structures, and electronic sensors designed to detect movement patterns and tactical decision-making under stress. Elena approached the course with her characteristic combination of apparent uncertainty and subtle competence. Her initial movements looked hesitant, like someone unfamiliar with advanced tactical techniques, but observers watching closely might have noticed the way she automatically assessed cover positions and identified potential fields of fire. The exercise required teams of 4 to move through the course while maintaining communication and mutual support. Elena found herself assigned to a mixed unit that included Braxton Morrison and a German KSK operator named Klaus Weber, who spoke English with precise military terminology that suggested extensive international training. "Try to keep up logistics," Braxton announced as they prepared to enter the course. "This isn't walking through supply warehouses. This is real soldier movement." But as the exercise began, something remarkable happened. Elena's movements through the obstacle course were not just competent, they were textbook perfect. She used cover and concealment with the systematic precision of someone who'd been trained in environments where exposure meant death. Her communication was crisp and professional, using proper tactical terminology with the fluency that came only from extensive field experience. Most significantly, she began to anticipate threats and identify optimal routes through complex terrain before other team members recognized the same opportunities. It was the kind of tactical awareness that separated amateur soldiers from combat veterans. Weber, whose own training had been extensive enough to recognize advanced techniques, when he saw them, found himself studying Elena with growing puzzlement. Her movement patterns suggested someone whose training had included urban warfare, close quarters combat, and small unit tactics, not the kind of skills typically associated with logistics support. The course culminated in a simulated hostage rescue scenario where teams had to clear a building while protecting civilian targets and neutralizing hostile forces. It was the kind of complex evolution that challenged even experienced special operations personnel. Elena took point position without being assigned, moving through the structure with systematic precision that spoke of extensive training in close quarters combat. Her room clearing techniques were flawless, her target identification instantaneous, her movement through confined spaces economical and efficient. By the time the exercise concluded, Weber was convinced that he was working alongside someone whose actual training background was significantly more extensive than her supposed logistics specialty would suggest. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Weber asked as they completed the after-action debrief. "Basic training covers movement techniques," Elena replied, her tone suggesting the conversation was closed. But Weber had trained with enough special operations personnel from various nations to recognize the difference between basic movement training and advanced tactical instruction. What he'd observed suggested someone whose education had included specialized techniques typically reserved for elite combat units. Rodriguez, observing from the control tower, filled additional pages of notes with observations that continued to paint a picture increasingly inconsistent with Elena's official background. Her performance during the tactical movement exercises had been virtually flawless, not the gradual improvement pattern she demonstrated during weapons training, but the consistent excellence of someone for whom such exercises were routine. In the women's locker room, Elena faced an unexpected complication. A burst pipe had flooded the shower facilities, forcing female personnel to use temporary accommodations adjacent to the main gymnasium. The shared changing area offered less privacy than the standard facilities. Elena had carefully timed her hygiene routine to avoid observation, but the new arrangement made this impossible. As she stood at her locker, she assessed her options. The tattoo on her left shoulder blade was her most identifying feature, a human skull wearing an ornate crown with the designation RQ11 beneath it. For 3 years, she had kept it concealed, avoiding situations that would expose it to view. She could skip the shower, but that would draw attention. Elite operators noticed details, and a sudden change in hygiene habits would register as anomalous behavior. Lieutenant Aldridge entered the locker room, nodding briefly to Elena before selecting a locker several spaces away. The lieutenant began changing with efficient movements, her back turned. Elena made her decision. She would proceed normally, but use strategic positioning to minimize exposure. She removed her training shirt, keeping her back to the wall, and quickly pulled on a high-necked athletic top that would cover the tattoo even in the showers. But as she turned to close her locker, Aldridge glanced in her direction. For a fraction of a second, the lieutenant's gaze fixed on Elena's shoulder, the momentary exposure of the tattoo's upper edge before it disappeared beneath the fabric. Aldridge's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Recognition followed by carefully controlled neutrality. She turned away, continuing her own preparations as though she had seen nothing unusual. Elena completed her routine, her external demeanor unchanged while her calculated the implications. Aldridge had seen something, perhaps not the entire tattoo, but enough to register as significant. The question was whether she recognized its meaning. Few people outside the most classified circles of military intelligence knew what an RQ designation signified. Even fewer would recognize it on sight. If Aldridge was one of those few, Elena's cover was already compromised. As they left the locker room, Aldridge spoke casually. "The obstacle course today was impressive. You've got good instincts." "Thank you, ma'am. I was just trying to keep up." Aldridge's eyes met hers. "You know, my brother served with a specialized unit. Never talked about it much, but he had this saying, the best operators are the ones nobody notices until it's too late." The comment hung in the air between them, not quite an accusation, but far from innocent conversation. Elena maintained her cover persona, offering a polite smile that revealed nothing. "Your brother sounds wise, ma'am." "He was," Aldridge replied. "He died in an operation 3 years ago. Intelligence failure. Someone leaked their position." The information registered in Elena's mind with perfect clarity. Aldridge wasn't making casual conversation. She was establishing a personal connection to the very mission that had brought Elena to the facility. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." Aldridge nodded. "The thing about leak specialist Thorne is that they rarely come from where you expect. The most dangerous enemies are the ones who look exactly like friends." With that, she walked away, leaving Elena to consider whether she had just acquired an ally or identified another complication. Colonel Montgomery's secure office line rang at precisely 2200 hours. He answered it with the caution of a man who knew that late-night calls rarely brought good news. "Montgomery?" "Richard, it's James." The voice belonged to General James Harrington, Montgomery's former commander and longtime mentor. "We need to talk about your trainee." Montgomery felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "I've been trying to get information for 2 days. Suddenly, everyone wants to talk. Because things have accelerated, we've confirmed 3 separate intelligence breaches, all originating from within NATO command structures. Operational details for deployments in 3 different theaters, all compromised within hours of final planning." Montgomery's grip tightened on the phone. "Casualties. 17 so far. 5 American, 4 British, 3 German, the rest spread across other coalition partners. And that's just what we've confirmed." "And Thorne, what's her connection?" Harrington's sigh was audible even through the secure line. "Richard, I'm going to tell you something that doesn't leave your office. Elena Thorne doesn't exist. The woman in your facility is operating under deep cover on direct authority from levels you and I will never reach." Montgomery absorbed this information, fitting it into the puzzle he'd been assembling. "She's counterintelligence. She's whatever the situation requires. Her mission parameters are need to know, and right now neither of us needs to know. What I can tell you is that she believes the source of the leaks is in your facility." "That's impossible. I personally vet every instructor and administrator, which is why you're not on the suspect list, but someone with access to your operational planning is selling information, and people are dying because of it." Montgomery's mind raced through the implications. If a traitor was operating within his facility, it meant someone he trusted was betraying everything they had sworn to protect. "What do you need from me?" "For now, just maintain normal operations. Don't interfere with Thorne, even if her actions seem irregular. She knows what she's doing. And if I discover the source before she does," Harrington's voice hardened, "then you contain the situation by any means necessary. This isn't just about intelligence anymore, Richard. It's about stopping the body count from rising." After the call ended, Montgomery sat in the darkness of his office, the conversation replaying in his mind. In 30 years of service, he had faced enemy fire, made life-or-death decisions under impossible pressure, and carried the weight of commands that sent good soldiers to their deaths. But he had never confronted the possibility that one of his own people, someone he had personally selected and trusted, might be selling out their brothers in arms for money. He pulled up the personnel files for his senior staff, the people with access to operational details that would be valuable to hostile intelligence services. Each face that appeared on his screen represented years of service, demonstrated loyalty, proven competence. One of them was a traitor. And Elena Thorne, whoever she really was, had come to his facility to expose them. The following morning brought a development that changed everything. A joint NATO training exercise was scheduled involving both the elite trainees and selected operational units from participating countries. The scenario responding to a coordinated terrorist attack on multiple targets. For Elena, it represented both opportunity and risk. The increased activity would provide cover for her to access areas normally restricted, but it also meant more eyes watching, more chances for her cover to be compromised. She was reviewing the exercise parameters when Warner rushed into their room, her expression animated. Have you heard they're bringing in observers from Pentagon? This just went from training to audition. Elena maintained her cover persona's appropriate response, mild anxiety mixed with determination. Guess we better make sure our uniforms are inspection ready. Not just uniforms, Warner replied. Word is they're specifically evaluating communications security protocols. My specialty. Her enthusiasm was genuine, the excitement of someone seeing a career opportunity. Elena processed this information against her mission objectives. Communications security evaluation meant specialized equipment would be deployed, the kind that might reveal patterns in data transmission that ordinary systems would miss. It could help identify how classified information was being extracted from the facility. It could also potentially expose her own carefully concealed communications with her handlers. The morning briefing confirmed Warner's information. Colonel Montgomery addressed the assembled personnel with the kind of measured authority that came from decades of command experience. Today's exercise will include elements not in the original training schedule. Pentagon observers will be evaluating our security protocols, particularly in communications and data handling. This is not just a training evolution, it's a demonstration of why the personnel in this room represent the best of allied special operations capabilities. His gaze swept the assembled operators, pausing briefly as it passed over Elena. For those of you in support roles, this is an opportunity to demonstrate your value to the operational teams. Everyone contributes to mission success, regardless of specialty. The implied message was clear: perform to standard or be replaced. For most support personnel, it represented pressure. For Elena, it was confirmation that her window of opportunity was narrowing. As the briefing concluded and personnel dispersed to their assigned stations, Lieutenant Aldridge approached Elena. Specialist Thorne, you're reassigned to communications support for this exercise. Report to the command center at 100. Elena maintained her cover persona's reaction, slight surprise, mixed with professional acceptance. Yes, ma'am. May I ask why the reassignment? Aldridge's expression revealed nothing. Colonel's orders. Apparently your file indicates some experience with secure communications protocols. It was a test. Elena's official file contained no such information. Either Aldridge was fishing for a reaction or someone had modified her records. Basic familiarization only, ma'am. I'll do my best. I'm sure you will, Aldridge replied. Just remember, in communications, it's not just about sending the right message. It's about making sure it reaches only the intended recipient. The warning, or was it a threat, hung in the air between them. Elena nodded her acknowledgement and turned away, her mind already calculating how to adapt her approach to this new development. The command center was a hive of controlled activity when Elena reported for duty. Communications specialists from multiple nations configured equipment, established secure channels, and tested redundancy systems. At the center of it all stood Master Sergeant Rodriguez, issuing crisp instructions with the confidence of someone who had managed similar operations for decades. He noticed Elena immediately. Thorne, you're on monitoring station 4. Lieutenant Aldridge says you have comms experience. Basic training only, Sergeant. Rodriguez studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. We'll see. Station 4 monitors all traffic between ground teams and command. You flag anything irregular, anything at all, you report directly to me. Clear. Crystal clear, Sergeant. As she took her position at the monitoring station, Elena conducted a rapid assessment. The reassignment wasn't random. Either someone suspected her true purpose and was testing her, or someone wanted her in a position to observe communications traffic. Either way, it placed her exactly where she needed to be. If classified information was being transmitted from the facility, it would pass through one of these systems. The question was whether she could identify the method before her own cover was blown. The exercise began at 1,000 hours. Simulated explosions, smoke generators, and electronic warfare systems created a realistic approximation of a coordinated terrorist attack. training teams deployed according to their assigned sectors, communications channels filled with tactical reports, and the command center processed the incoming data with professional efficiency. Elena monitored her assigned channels with the careful attention of someone determined to prove their competence in an unfamiliar role. But beneath that visible performance, her actual focus was on patterns in the data traffic anomalies, in transmission timing, unusual compression formats, irregular routing protocols. 3 hours into the exercise, she found what she was looking for. A data packet that appeared normal at first glance, but contained compressed information hidden within standard telemetry reporting. It was elegant in its simplicity, using official channels to transmit unauthorized data concealed within legitimate traffic. She traced the origin to a terminal in the senior staff section of the command center. The user ID belonged to Colonel Montgomery's executive officer, Major James Sullivan. Elena maintained her outward focus on the monitoring task while her mind processed this new information. Sullivan had access to all operational planning security protocols and personnel assignments. He was positioned perfectly to access classified information and transmit it without raising alarms. But something didn't fit. The transmission method was sophisticated, utilizing techniques that required specialized knowledge of data encryption and communication security. Sullivan's background was in logistics and personnel management, not technical operations. Either he had hidden capabilities or he was the visible part of a more complex operation. As these thoughts crystallized, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. Red emergency lights bathed the facility in crimson as the automated voice of the security system announced, "Attention all personnel. This is not a drill. Security breach in sectors Alpha and Charlie. Implement containment protocols immediately." Rodriguez's voice cut through the sudden chaos. "Status report. What's happening?" The communications officer at the main console responded with professional urgency. "Actual explosions reported in the north perimeter, Sergeant. Not simulated. We have real casualties." The exercise had just become reality. Elena assessed the situation with the rapid calculation of someone trained for exactly this scenario. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence, a real attack during a simulated one, when security forces would initially interpret actual explosions as part of the exercise. Rodriguez took command with the confidence of a veteran. "Lock down all communications. Emergency protocols only. Medical teams to north perimeter. Security teams implement Foxtrot containment pattern." The command center transformed instantly from exercise management to actual crisis response. As personnel rushed to their emergency stations, Elena made a decision that would expose her capabilities, but might save lives. She approached Rodriguez directly. "Sergeant, the north perimeter explosion is a diversion. Check the security feeds for the communications array." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "How would you know that, specialist?" "Because it's what I would do if I wanted to cover data extraction during the confusion." For a moment, Rodriguez studied her with the focused intensity of someone reassessing a situation based on new information. Then, without questioning further, he turned to the security console. "Pull up feeds from the communications array. Now." The screen showed 3 figures in tactical gear placing devices on the main communications tower, not part of any exercise scenario. "Security breach confirmed," Rodriguez announced. "Hostile forces targeting our communications infrastructure. Implement Omega Protocol." Elena felt a shift in the room's energy as elite operators recognized the transition from exercise to actual combat operations. Omega Protocol was reserved for the most serious security breaches, a complete lockdown, combined with aggressive response to hostile intrusion. What happened next would either complete her mission or expose her entirely. The second wave of explosions hit without warning. The command center shook violently as support beams cracked and ceiling panels crashed down. Emergency generators kicked in as the main power failed, bathing the chaos in the dim red glow of backup lighting. Through the smoke and confusion, Elena saw Rodriguez pinned beneath fallen structural debris, blood streaming from a head wound. The communications system sparked and died as the attack achieved its primary objective, cutting off the facility from outside assistance. In that moment of crisis, with lives hanging in the balance and her mission at a critical juncture, Elena Thorne made a choice. She shed the carefully constructed persona of the past 3 months and became who she truly was. Her voice cut through the chaos with the kind of absolute command authority that made even hardened combat veterans respond instinctively. Security teams Alpha and Bravo established perimeter control, medical personnel to the command center. Communications specialists implement backup systems immediately. She issued orders with the precision of someone who had commanded elite units in actual combat. Lieutenant Aldridge, emerging from the smoke with a tactical radio in hand, stopped short when she heard Elena's voice. The transformation was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment she didn't recognize the woman she'd been observing for months. "Who the hell are you, really?" Aldridge demanded. Elena met her gaze without pretense. "Someone who can save these people if you let me do my job. Are you with me or not, Lieutenant?" Before Aldridge could respond, a young officer pushed through the chaos. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, recently assigned from Pentagon Liaison, his uniform still crisp, despite the surrounding destruction. "What the hell is going on here?" Webb demanded, his voice carrying the arrogance of authority without experience. "Who authorized Omega Protocol? That's a command-level decision." His eyes found Elena issuing orders to senior personnel operators with years of combat experience responding without question to a supposed logistics specialist. Webb's face flushed with anger. "Specialists, return to your station immediately. You are not authorized to issue tactical commands." Elena didn't even turn to acknowledge him, continuing to coordinate the emergency response with the calm efficiency of a natural leader. Webb's arrogance transformed to rage at being ignored. He strode forward, grabbed Elena's shoulder, and spun her around with enough force to tear the fabric of her uniform shirt. "I said stand down, Specialist. That's a direct order." The torn fabric split further, revealing what had been hidden beneath it, a tattoo of a crowned skull with the designation RQ-11 clearly visible on her left shoulder blade. For 3 eternal seconds, the command center went completely still, all eyes locked on the revealed marking. The crowned skull wasn't just any tattoo. It was a designation that existed in whispered legends among special operations personnel, the mark of an organization that officially didn't exist, operating under authorities that were never acknowledged. "Reaper Queen," someone whispered the words, barely audible, but carrying across the silent command center like thunder. Webb's grip on Elena's torn shirt went slack, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally something approaching terror. Even he, despite his inexperience, had heard stories about RQ designations. Rodriguez, still pinned beneath the debris, but conscious, barked a laugh that turned into a pained cough. "Damn," he managed. "I knew something was off, but this is above my pay grade." The radio in Aldridge's hand crackled to life with a transmission that carried the static patterns of heavily encrypted communication. "Falcon Base, this is Apex Command. Confirm Reaper Queen protocol authentication. Immediate response required." Elena, or whoever she really was, took the handset from Aldridge's unresisting fingers. "Apex Command authentication confirmed. RQ-11 active. Facility compromised, multiple hostiles implementing containment protocols." The response came immediately, the voice carrying authority that made even senior officers straighten unconsciously. "All personnel under Reaper Queen, tactical command effective immediately. Special response team inbound ETA 12 minutes. She handed the radio back to Aldridge and turned to address the stunned personnel. "Well," she said with the kind of understatement that defied the gravity of the situation, "I suppose that changes things." The command center transformed in seconds. Elite operators who had spent months dismissing Elena Thorne as an insignificant logistics specialist now stood at rigid attention, awaiting orders from a woman whose actual rank and authority transcended normal military hierarchy. Through the smoke and chaos, the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, military aircraft arriving with the kind of rapid response that suggested pre-positioned assets rather than emergency deployment. These weren't standard rescue helicopters. They were specialized command and control craft carrying personnel whose security clearances gave them authority over situations most officers would never encounter. Elena, or whoever she truly was, began issuing orders with the calm precision of someone for whom crisis management was routine. "Secure all exits. Establish defensive perimeters at access points Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Medical teams prioritize critical injuries. Communications specialists establish secure channel with approaching aircraft." She knelt beside Rodriguez, quickly assessing his injuries. "Hang in there, Sergeant. You've got a concussion and possibly fractured ribs, but nothing immediately life-threatening." Rodriguez coughed, blood speckling his lips. Knew you weren't logistics, he managed. Way you handled that M4 first day. Too familiar. You've got good instincts, she replied as she applied a pressure bandage to his head wound. That's why you're still alive. The first helicopter touched down on the facility's landing pad. The man who emerged wore civilian clothes that somehow screamed military authority. In his mid-50s with steel gray hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades in harsh environments, he moved with the controlled economy of someone accustomed to operating in high-threat scenarios. Behind him came a team of operators whose tactical gear and weapon systems didn't match any standard military issue. They spread out with practiced efficiency, securing the landing zone and establishing a defensive perimeter without requiring specific instructions. But it was the final figure to emerge from the helicopter that made everyone present understand the true magnitude of what was happening. Commander Riker Beckham was a legend in special operations circles, a man whose 30-year career included missions that rewrote the rules of modern warfare. His presence at a compromised NATO facility could only mean the situation had implications far beyond a simple security breach. Beckham approached Elena with measured steps, his eyes taking in the destruction around them, before focusing on her with laser intensity. Reaper Queen, he said, his voice carrying enough authority to silence all other conversation. It's been a long time. Elena's response was simple, direct, and somehow more revealing than any elaborate explanation. Hello, Riker. Sorry about the cover. The casual use of the commander's first name confirmed what the assembled personnel were beginning to suspect. This wasn't a chance encounter between superior and subordinate. This was a reunion between professionals whose working relationship operated at levels far beyond normal military hierarchy. How bad, Beckham asked. The facility is compromised. Multiple hostiles, at least one insider threat confirmed. I've identified the transmission method, but not all the participants. Beckham nodded, absorbing the information with the calm assessment of a man who had faced worse scenarios. Casualties. 6 confirmed, 14 injured. We contained the initial attack, but they'll make another attempt. Lieutenant Aldridge approached cautiously, her expression a mix of confusion and growing comprehension. Sir, we need to evacuate wounded personnel. Our medical facilities were damaged in the explosion. Beckham turned to her. Lieutenant, evacuation is already underway. My team will coordinate with your medical staff. His tone wasn't unkind, but it carried the absolute certainty of command. Aldridge nodded, then turned to Elena. When you arrived, you were already investigating something, weren't you? Elena met her gaze directly, the pretense of the past months finally discarded. Your brother, Lieutenant, Jason Aldridge, Navy SEAL, killed 3 years ago during an operation in the Persian Gulf. The official report called it enemy action. The truth is, his team's position was compromised before they ever set foot on the ground. Aldridge's face drained of color. How do you know about Jason? Because I was there. Different unit, different mission, but same outcome. We lost good people because someone sold information. That's why I'm here, to find who's responsible and shut them down permanently. Before Aldridge could process this revelation, another figure pushed through the crowd. Colonel Montgomery, his uniform torn and dirty, but his bearing undiminished. Commander Beckham, he said formally, I need to understand what's happening at my facility. Beckham turned to him with the measured assessment of someone who had spent decades evaluating threats and allies. Colonel, what's happening is the conclusion of a counterintelligence operation 18 months in development. Specialist Thorne, or rather Major Mitchell, has been operating under deep cover to identify security leaks that have compromised multiple NATO operations. The revelation hit the assembled personnel like a physical blow. Major, not specialist, not logistics support, but a field-grade officer whose actual rank put her among senior leadership. Rodriguez, now being tended by medics, barked another pained laugh. Major, she outranks half the officers in this program. She outranks all of them, Beckham corrected. Her actual position is classified beyond your clearance level, but I can tell you she has operational authority that supersedes conventional command structures. Lieutenant Webb, still holding the torn fabric of Elena's shirt, seemed to have lost the ability to speak as the magnitude of his error became clear. He had physically assaulted a senior officer conducting a classified operation under direct command authority from the highest levels of military intelligence. Elena, now revealed as Major Haley Mitchell, seemed more concerned with completing her mission then pursuing retribution for Webb's behavior. The corruption network extends deeper than initial intelligence suggested, she reported to Beckham. Multiple officers compromised financial connections to hostile intelligence services, confirmed operational security violations documented. She produced a small device from her remaining clothing, a military-grade data storage unit that had somehow survived the physical confrontation and equipment failures. Complete evidence package, she continued, handing the device to Beckham. Financial records, communication intercepts, operational timelines, everything needed for prosecution and network dismantlement. Beckham accepted the device with the gravity appropriate to information purchased with months of dangerous undercover work. Casualties. None directly attributable to the leak, but several operations were compromised early enough to require mission adjustments. Without intervention, projected casualty counts would have been significant. The clinical language couldn't mask the reality that Haley's mission had potentially saved dozens of lives by identifying security vulnerabilities before they could be exploited by hostile forces. Colonel Montgomery, processing the implications of what he'd just learned, felt his understanding of the past 3 months shift completely. Every anomaly in Haley's behavior, every inconsistency in her performance, every moment when her capabilities seemed inconsistent with her supposed background, all suddenly made perfect sense as the actions of a highly trained operative maintaining cover while conducting surveillance. "Who's compromised?" he asked, dreading the answer, but needing to understand the scope of the security failure. Haley's expression darkened as she prepared to deliver information that would destroy careers and potentially send people to military prison for the rest of their lives. "Colonel Richard Montgomery," she said quietly, "you're under arrest for treason, espionage, and conspiracy to commit acts of terrorism against United States military personnel." The words hit like lightning, stunning everyone present into absolute silence. Montgomery himself seemed unable to process what he'd just heard, his face cycling through disbelief, denial, and growing comprehension as the implications became clear. "That's impossible," he managed finally, his voice barely audible. "I've served my country for 30 years. My record is spotless. My security clearances are current. Your financial records show deposits totaling $2.7 million from sources connected to foreign intelligence services," Haley replied with clinical precision. "Your communication history includes encrypted transmissions to individuals identified as hostile assets. Your access to NATO operational planning provided information that directly resulted in the compromise of 4 separate special operations missions. The evidence was delivered with the kind of systematic completeness that spoke of months of careful investigation. This wasn't suspicion or theory, it was documented proof of betrayal at the highest levels." Security personnel from Beckham's team moved forward with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated and professional as they prepared to take Montgomery into custody. The colonel didn't resist his 30 years of military training, recognizing the inevitability of what was happening. But as the handcuffs closed around his wrists, he looked at Haley with an expression that combined hatred, respect, and something approaching admiration. "How long have you known?" "Since the 2nd week," she replied. "Your operational security was adequate, but not perfect. Small mistakes, but enough to establish pattern confirmation. And you've been watching me for 3 months, documenting everything, building your case while pretending to be some harmless logistics clerk. That was the mission." The simple acknowledgement carried more weight than any elaborate explanation. Haley had spent 3 months living among people who dismissed her as insignificant, enduring harassment and mockery while methodically gathering evidence that would destroy careers and save lives. As Montgomery was led away, Lieutenant Aldridge approached Haley with newfound respect in her eyes. "You knew about Jason all along. Was that part of your cover story, using my brother to gain my trust?" Haley shook her head. "No, your brother was one of the first casualties of this leak. His operation was compromised 12 hours before insertion. When I saw your name on the facility roster, I knew you might become either an asset or a complication. And which did I turn out to be?" Before Haley could answer, the tactical radio crackled with urgent transmissions. Perimeter security teams reported movement at multiple access points, a coordinated assault on the facility by unknown forces. "They're making their play," Beckham announced. "They'll try to eliminate Montgomery before he can testify and destroy any evidence we've collected." Haley's transition to combat commander was instantaneous and absolute. Establish defensive positions at all access points. Priority is protecting wounded personnel and securing the evidence package. The elite operators who had spent months dismissing her now responded to her commands without hesitation, recognizing the natural authority of someone who had earned their position through capabilities rather than rank. Braxton, who had been coordinating perimeter security, approached with a tactical headset. "Major, we've got at least 20 hostiles approaching from 3 directions. Heavy weapons coordinated movement patterns. These aren't amateurs." Haley accepted the headset, already calculating tactical responses. They'll split their forces primary team for evidence destruction, secondary for Montgomery extraction or elimination. Tertiary will provide covering fire and exfiltration support. The precision of her assessment impressed even Beckham, who had spent decades evaluating tactical scenarios. "You've been inside their planning process." "Not directly, but I've identified their methodology. Major James Sullivan has been running a sophisticated counterintelligence operation for at least 5 years. This is his standard approach." Aldridge's head snapped up. "Sullivan Montgomery's XO. And the actual mastermind," Haley confirmed. "Montgomery was an asset valuable for his access, but ultimately expendable. Sullivan is the primary target." Beckham's expression hardened. "Where is Sullivan now?" "Unknown. He wasn't in the command center during the initial attack." The implications were clear. Sullivan was still active, possibly coordinating the assault forces now converging on the facility. The first shots rang out from the northern perimeter, the distinctive sound of military-grade rifles on semi-automatic. Braxton's radio crackled with urgent reports from the defensive positions. "They're testing our perimeter," Haley announced. "Standard procedure before committing to full assault." She turned to Aldridge. "Lieutenant, I need you to coordinate evacuation of all wounded personnel to the secondary medical facility. Braxton established fallback positions in case the perimeter is breached." Both officers moved to comply without hesitation, recognizing the combat experience behind her commands. Beckham studied the facility schematics displayed on a tactical terminal. "They'll concentrate on the eastern approach. Best cover shortest distance to the command center." Haley nodded her agreement. "We'll position our strongest response team there, but keep reserves for the inevitable flanking maneuver." As they finalized defensive preparations, Rodriguez was helped to his feet by medical personnel. Despite his injuries, the master sergeant insisted on remaining operational. "With respect, Major," he said, blood still caking one side of his face. "I've been running security for this facility for 8 years. I know every weakness, every blind spot. You need me in position." Haley assessed him with the practiced eye of someone who had commanded wounded personnel in combat zones. "Medical station only, Sergeant. You can coordinate from there, but you're not cleared for combat operations with that head injury." Rodriguez started to protest and stopped himself, recognizing the concern behind the order. "Understood, ma'am, but there's something you should know about Sullivan. He's got an escape route, a maintenance tunnel that doesn't appear on standard facility schematics. South Sector Utility Building." The information shifted their tactical calculations immediately. Haley turned to Beckham. "He'll use the tunnel to extract while his assault team provides distraction. We need to cut off that exit point." "I'll take a team," Beckham replied. "You coordinate the primary defense." The smooth division of responsibilities reflected years of operational compatibility, two professionals who had worked together enough to anticipate each other's decisions without detailed discussion. As they prepared to move to their respective positions, an unexpected voice broke through the tactical planning. "Major Mitchell," Lieutenant Webb said, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine contrition. "I request permission to join Commander Beckham's team. I've worked with Major Sullivan for 6 months. I know his protocols, his movement patterns." Haley studied the young officer whose actions had exposed her identity. His request represented both tactical value and personal redemption. "Granted," she said after a moment. "But understand this isn't about salvaging your career or easing your conscience. It's about completing the mission and keeping people alive." Clear. Webb's response carried the humility of someone who had received an undeserved second chance. "Crystal clear, ma'am." As the teams deployed to their assigned positions, the assault intensified. Automatic weapons fire peppered the defensive perimeter, explosive charges breached the outer security fence, and smoke of grenades created visual cover for advancing hostile forces. In the command center, Haley coordinated the defense with the calm efficiency of someone who had managed similar crises throughout her career. Her commands were precise, her tactical adjustments immediate, her situational awareness comprehensive. The operators who had spent months dismissing her as an insignificant support specialist now witnessed the true extent of her capabilities, not just professional competence, but the kind of combat leadership that inspired absolute confidence, even in the most dire circumstances. Braxton, directing fire teams at the eastern perimeter, found himself executing tactical maneuvers based on her assessment of enemy movements that hadn't yet materialized, only to have hostiles appear exactly where she predicted seconds after his teams had established optimal firing positions. How the hell did she know they'd shift to that approach? He muttered over the tactical frequency. Rodriguez's voice responded from the medical station, a hint of amusement cutting through the pain. Because she's been hunting people like this for years, Captain. While we've been playing soldier, she's been fighting a war most of us don't even know exists. At the Southern Utility Building, Beckham's team moved with practiced stealth toward the hidden escape tunnel. Webb led the way, his knowledge of the facility proving valuable despite his earlier failures of judgment. They reached the concealed entrance just as a figure emerged from the shadows. Major James Sullivan, dressed in tactical gear, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and a compact submachine gun in his hands. Sullivan froze when he saw the weapons trained on him, his expression cycling through shock calculation, and finally a strange form of acceptance. "Commander Beckham," he said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I suppose I should have anticipated this. Who made me? Was it the financial traces? I thought those were sufficiently obscured." "It wasn't the money," Beckham replied. "It was the pattern recognition. Same transmission methods, same operational compromises. Once we identified the signature, it was just a matter of finding who had access and opportunity." Sullivan nodded as if receiving confirmation of a professional assessment rather than facing arrest for treason. "And Montgomery, was he actually useful or just a convenient patsy?" "He made his choices," Beckham said, "just like you did." Sullivan's laugh held no humor. "Choices. Do you have any idea what they offered? Not just money, access to intelligence and networks beyond anything we've developed. Technological capabilities decades ahead of current systems. And all it cost was American lives." Webb interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. Sullivan looked at the young officer with something approaching pity. "It's never that simple, Lieutenant. There are larger games in play than national allegiances, longer time frames than single human lifespans." His hand moved slightly, adjusting his grip on the submachine gun. Beckham's team responded instantly, their weapons tracking the movement with lethal focus. "I wouldn't," Beckham advised. "Despite what you've done, I'd prefer to take you alive." Sullivan studied the operators surrounding him, calculating odds with the precision of someone trained to evaluate tactical scenarios. After a moment, he slowly lowered his weapon. "I suppose there are some conversations worth having before this concludes," he said, placing the gun on the ground and raising his hands in surrender. As Webb moved forward to secure him, Sullivan's expression changed, a subtle shift from resignation to calculated action. His right hand dropped to his belt, extracting what appeared to be a standard military radio, but with modified components. "Webb down," Beckham shouted, recognizing the threat an instant before Sullivan's thumb pressed the activation switch. The lieutenant dropped instinctively, conditioning overriding confusion. The other operators scattered for cover as Sullivan raised the device. "Contingencies within contingencies," Sullivan announced, his voice calm despite the weapons now aimed at his center mass. "Always have a final option." The device in his hand emitted a high-pitched whine, its indicator lights flashing in rapid sequence. Not a radio, a remote detonator. In the half-second before anyone could fire, Webb lunged forward from his prone position, tackling Sullivan at knee level. Both men crashed to the concrete floor, the detonator skittering away from Sullivan's grasp. But the activation sequence had already begun. Throughout the facility, secondary explosive devices hidden during the initial assault began detonating in a carefully orchestrated sequence designed to destroy evidence, eliminate witnesses, and cover the escape of assault teams. In the command center, Haley recognized the pattern immediately. Secondary devices. All personnel implement scorched earth protocols. The NATO protocol reserved for catastrophic security breaches prioritized personnel evacuation over equipment preservation. Teams began falling back to designated extraction points, covering each other's withdrawal with disciplined fire. Braxton found himself cut off from his primary escape route by a collapsing ceiling section. As he searched for an alternative path, a hostile assault team rounded the corner, weapons raised. Before they could fire, a figure moved into the corridor behind them. Elena Thorne, or rather Major Haley Mitchell, no longer concealing her capabilities. She engaged the hostiles with a precision that bordered on supernatural, her movements so fluid and efficient that the encounter ended before Braxton fully registered what had happened. 5 armed opponents, 5 precise shots, 5 bodies on the floor. She approached Braxton, her expression revealing nothing of the lethal violence she'd just unleashed. Southern corridor is still clear. Move now. As they navigated the burning facility, Braxton found himself processing the complete reversal of their relationship. For months, he had dismissed her as insignificant. Now she was saving his life with capabilities that exceeded anything he'd witnessed in 15 years of special operations. Major, he managed, as they reached a secure area. I need to apologize for— Not now, Captain, she cut him off. We're still operational. Save the contrition for when everyone's safe. At the Southern Utility Building, Beckham's team had secured Sullivan, but the detonator's activation had triggered a facility-wide crisis. The commander's tactical radio crackled with Haley's voice calm despite the chaos. Riker's secondary devices throughout the facility. Full evacuation underway. What's your status? Target secured. Webb is injured but ambulatory. We're moving to extraction point Charlie. Confirmed. I'm consolidating remaining personnel at the landing zone. Preliminary casualty assessment. 3 KIA 22 wounded, all hostiles either neutralized or retreated. The professional exchange revealed nothing of their personal history or the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. That would come later, after the immediate crisis was resolved. 48 hours later, the survivors gathered at a secure military installation 60 miles from the compromised NATO facility. Medical teams had treated the wounded, intelligence officers had debriefed the witnesses, and the full scope of Sullivan's operation was beginning to emerge. In a restricted briefing room, Commander Beckham addressed the key personnel who had experienced the crisis firsthand. His presentation was concise, revealing only what their security clearances allowed. Major James Sullivan was running a sophisticated counterintelligence operation for at least 5 years. He sold operational details to multiple hostile services, resulting in compromised missions across 3 theaters. The financial traces alone account for over $12 million in payments. The assembled officers absorbed this information in stunned silence. Sullivan had been respected, trusted, a model officer whose betrayal now seemed inconceivable. Colonel Montgomery's involvement appears to have been more limited, Beckham continued. He was recruited through a combination of financial incentives and blackmail. His cooperation was primarily passive, allowing access rather than actively gathering intelligence. Lieutenant Aldridge raised her hand. Sir, was there confirmation regarding Operation Kingfisher, my brother's mission? Beckham's expression softened slightly. Yes, Lieutenant. Sullivan specifically compromised that operation. Your brother and his team never had a chance if the insertion point was under observation before they arrived. The confirmation brought visible pain to Aldridge's face, but also a certain resolution, the answer to questions that had haunted her for years. Where is Major Mitchell? Rodriguez asked, his head still bandaged, but his mind clear. Reassigned, Beckham replied, his tone indicating the subject was closed. Her mission here is complete. The assembled personnel recognized the finality in his voice. Whatever Elena Thorne or Haley Mitchell had been to them during the past months, that chapter was now concluded. The woman who had lived among them endured their dismissal and mockery while systematically building a case against traitors in their midst, had already disappeared back into the shadows from which she came. After the briefing, Beckham found Braxton waiting in the hallway, his expression troubled. Commander, is there any way to contact Major Mitchell? I never got the chance to properly apologize for how I treated her. Beckham studied this captain with the measured assessment of someone who had evaluated countless soldiers over decades of command. She wasn't there for apologies, Captain. She was there to complete a mission that saved lives, including yours. I understand that, sir, but 3 months of treating someone like they're insignificant only to discover their— He trailed off, unable to fully articulate the reversal. Beckham nodded, recognizing the genuine regret behind the request. I'll pass along the sentiment if our paths cross again. But understand something, Captain. In her world, being underestimated isn't an insult, it's a tactical advantage. Your dismissal of her capabilities was exactly what allowed her to operate effectively. The perspective shift was profound. The realization that what Braxton had perceived as cruelty had actually been unwitting assistance in a mission that transcended his understanding. There's one more thing you should know, Beckham added. That day in Afghanistan when your team was pinned down and an unknown sniper saved your lives, that was her. Same mission, different phase. She was already tracking Sullivan's network when your team's location was compromised. The revelation hit Braxton like a physical blow. The mysterious voice on the radio, the precision shots that had dropped 11 Taliban fighters, the guardian angel who had vanished without recognition, all had been the woman he'd later spent months mocking as an incompetent logistics clerk. Before he could process this information, Beckham was already walking away, his duty to this phase of operations complete. 6 months later, at a different military facility on another continent, Commander Beckham entered a secure briefing room where a woman waited, studying intelligence reports spread across a tactical display. "Hello, Haley," he said as the door sealed behind him. "Nice work on the Sullivan network." Final count was 28 operatives across 11 countries, all rolled up based on the intelligence you gathered. Major Haley Mitchell, the woman formerly known as Elena Thorne, looked up from her work. At 32, her blonde hair now cut in a different style, her appearance transformed enough that former associates would struggle to recognize her. "It wasn't just Sullivan," she replied. "He was the visible element of a much larger operation. The financial connections lead back to organizations with resources beyond conventional nation-state actors." Beckham nodded, having anticipated this assessment. "Which is why you're here. We have a new assignment, different theater, different challenges, but connected to what you uncovered at the NATO facility." He placed a sealed file on the table between them. Haley didn't open it immediately, her gaze still fixed on the commander. "Any word on the people from Fort Blackwood, Rodriguez, Aldridge, Braxton? All recovered from their injuries. Rodriguez received a commendation for his assistance. Aldridge was promoted and reassigned to a Tier 1 unit. Seems exposure to your methods impressed some important observers. Braxton requested transfer to advanced tactical training. Apparently having his assumptions challenged was educational." A ghost of a smile touched Haley's lips. "And Lieutenant Webb, the one who exposed my identity by tearing my shirt. Disciplinary action was considered but ultimately dismissed given his actions during Sullivan's capture. He's been reassigned to a security detail at the Pentagon, closely supervised." Haley nodded, then finally reached for the file. "How deep does this go, Riker?" The question carried weight beyond the immediate mission parameters, a professional seeking insight from one of the few people who understood the true scope of what they confronted. "Deeper than we initially assessed," Beckham admitted. "Sullivan's network was sophisticated, but it was just one component of a larger architecture. We're dealing with something that transcends traditional intelligence operations, a systematic attempt to compromise command structures across multiple allied forces." Haley absorbed this information with the calm assessment of someone who had confronted similar challenges throughout her career. "Timeline: you deploy in 48 hours. Deep cover, extended duration. This one makes Fort Blackwood look like a training exercise." She opened the file, scanning its contents with practiced efficiency. After a moment, she closed it and looked up at the man who had been her Dementor commander and one of the few constants in a life defined by aliases and mission parameters. "Just another ghost story," she said, echoing words she had used years ago in a different context. "The kind no one believes until it's too late." Beckham nodded, recognizing the acceptance of a mission that would require her to once again become someone else entirely, to bury her true capabilities beneath layers of carefully constructed deception. "The most dangerous person in any room is the one no one bothers to watch," Haley finished. "I remember the lessons." As she rose to prepare for her next deployment, her hand unconsciously touched the left shoulder, where the crown skull tattoo marked her as something few people ever encountered, and even fewer understood: a hunter of hunters operating in shadows where conventional authority held no sway. The mission that had brought her to Fort Blackwood was complete, but the larger war continued. And in that war, her greatest weapon wasn't her marksmanship or combat skills, but her ability to become invisible in plain sight, the woman everyone underestimated until the moment when estimation became irrelevant. Because that's what real warriors do. They serve in silence, sacrifice without recognition, and disappear back into the shadows when their work is done, leaving only the memory of what genuine strength looks like when it chooses to remain hidden until the moment when hiding is no longer possible.